First, let's start with this case. My parents live in a less developed country compared to where I live. My siblings and I all reside in North America or Europe. When I got my new job, I reviewed my budget and realized I could comfortably send $1,300 a month to my parents without affecting my personal lifestyle or savings. I knew this amount would allow them to retire and live comfortably. During a visit home, I set up a joint bank account with them. This allowed me to see their transactions and ensure they weren't being scammed or mismanaging funds. For about a year and a half, everything went smoothly. Then, I noticed a recurring $200 transfer every month. When I asked my parents about it, they explained they were helping my brother with his finances because he was having difficulties with his budget. The issue is, my brother doesn't need help. He's a scholarship student and receives a stipend from our home government to study abroad. What he wants is extra money to fund his partying lifestyle. When I found out, I reduced the amount I sent my parents by $200, reasoning that if they could afford to give that money away, they clearly didn't need it. My mom noticed the change and called me, furious. She accused me of being a bad daughter and sister. I asked her how much financial support she and my dad had given me for partying when I was studying abroad. The answer, of course, was zero. In fact, they had even tried to discourage me from attending university in Canada. In our culture, the concept of filial piety is very important, and my mom invoked it, saying I was failing in my duty as their child. I explained that I wasn't willing to subsidize my brother's social life through them. From then on, they would receive $1,100 a month, and if they sent any of that money to my brother, I would reduce their support by that amount going forward. My brother also called to complain, accusing me of cutting off the money he was getting from our parents. I told him I hadn't cut him off. Our parents were welcome to go back to working labor-intensive jobs in their old age if they wanted to fund his partying. Otherwise, they could live comfortably on the money I provided. My boyfriend and many of my friends support my decision. However, most of my extended family and people from my culture think I'm being disrespectful and unfair. That said, for the past 2 months, my parents have been spending the money solely on themselves, so it seems my approach is working. Am I wrong for setting these boundaries with my parents? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. And since your parents probably don't tell you often enough, I'll say it for them. You are an amazingly thoughtful, loving, and caring child to your parents. You send them upwards of $1,000 every month just so they can retire and not have to work. That's amazing. You are also reducing the amount you give them as a preventative measure to make sure they don't get taken advantage of by a spoiled son. If they give $200 now without consequences, it would eventually increase to $300, then $400, then $500, and so on and so forth. You set a boundary that will help your parents to keep their money for themselves so they can continue to remain retired and not spread themselves too thin. You're not in the wrong. If you wanted to give your brother $200 a month, you could send it direct. You don't have to give your parents money to make an end run so that you're giving your brother that $200. I agree with your logic. If they're sending $200 a month to brother, that's money they don't actually need from you. The total effect is that you stopped giving brother $200 a month. You're not in the wrong. They don't want to be treated like children, but will gladly take a monthly allowance from you. An allowance they wouldn't have if you had listened to them and accepted their lack of support. I doubt your brother will send them money when he gets a job. So they have a choice to make. Keep giving him money they claim to need, or use the money so they can have an easier retirement. Next up, rewritten story. After Thanksgiving break, I, 25, flew back to Texas, where I'm temporarily working. My family is in Georgia, and we spent the holiday in Alabama. To catch my flight back to Texas, I had to drive back to Georgia, and between Thanksgiving weekend traffic and a tight schedule, I barely made it to the airport. It was a long, stressful day of traveling, and by the time I landed in Texas late that night, I was completely exhausted. I decided to crash at my guy friend's house, where I park my car during trips since he drives me to and from the airport. I let my family know I had landed safely and made it to my destination for the night. but I didn't go into details about where I was staying. My parents don't know this friend, as I don't disclose every single person I hang out with, especially since we've dated casually before, and not everyone is worth introducing to the family. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. to let my job know I'd be taking the day off. I was still drained from all the traveling, so I went back to sleep, turning off my alarms and keeping my phone on silent. I woke up around 10 a.m. to find that I'd missed a ton of calls, 25 from my sister and 30 each from my parents. They'd also left several voicemails. To my surprise, there were also messages from the Texas Police Department and my supervisor, all saying my parents had been desperately trying to reach me. When I finally called my family back, they were frantic. They'd called the police because they noticed my car wasn't parked outside my apartment and assumed the worst. I explained that I was home, safe, and had just been sleeping. My sister demanded that I send a picture of my car in front of my apartment to prove I wasn't somewhere I had no business being. Now, my family isn't speaking to me because they're upset I didn't tell them where I was staying. My sister is especially frustrated, saying things like, "You didn't even tell anyone you knew anybody out there. And nobody sleeps that hard or that late." She also scolded me for not being more responsive to my phone. To add to this, my family has always been critical of my sleeping habits. I'm a heavy sleeper and love to sleep in when I don't have early obligations. Despite that, I've never been late to work, I'm responsible, and I've never lost a job. I just value my rest, but they constantly give me grief about it. My mom is now stonewalling me because I didn't disclose that I was staying at a friend's house and didn't tell them I was taking the day off. They keep saying they thought I might have been dead and were worried because they assumed I didn't know anyone in Texas. Am I the bad guy here for sleeping through their calls? For not telling them where I was staying or that I took the day off? I feel like at 25 I'm entitled to some privacy and don't need to overshare every detail of my life. Am I wrong? Let's start judging. Wow. Just wow. Are they all always up in your business like this? Does everyone have each other under a microscope? You told them that you landed safely and made it back, and that was all you really had to do. If my family called my boss to find me, I'd be the one pretty pissed off to buy. You're not in the wrong times a million, and tell your mom to get therapy if she thinks stonewalling is in some way going to help your relationship. I understand your sister being worried that your car isn't at your apartment, but wow, did she go from 0 to 100? Is there some specific reason we're missing here that they would be concerned about that? Or are they always jumping to the worst conclusions? Take some deep breaths, OP. Consider going LC or NC if you feel that you need some space from them. You're not in the wrong. Your parents and sister are insane. Let's start with one fact. You are a grown adult. Everything else follows from that. You are allowed to sleep in. You are allowed to sleep over at a friend's house. You are allowed to screw them if you want. You are allowed to take the day off at work. You are allowed to not answer your phone. Now, I do get that some people get all panicky after flights, but you let your family know. I mean, that was already above and beyond the call of duty. Given this story, I have a hunch that your mom is trying to control you in all sorts of ways. Let me reassure you, you are not the idiot here. And not only that, but you probably need to push back harder on all of the other nonsense she's pulling. She wouldn't be doing this crazy nonsense if you had been pushing back against her in the 7 years since you became a legal adult. Next up, I got pregnant after a one-night stand. The guy and I were still casually talking afterward, and things were slowly moving toward dating. When I found out I was pregnant, we began dating officially and eventually moved in together. Yesterday, we were at his mom's house opening baby shower gifts. His brother and his brother's girlfriend were also there. Everything seemed fine, and I was enjoying hanging out with the girlfriend. However, my boyfriend and his brother were acting giggly and weird. His brother started asking me questions about my labor plans, like whether I was getting an epidural. When I asked what was going on, they said nothing and quickly changed the subject. As the evening went on, their behavior continued. Whenever they were alone in the kitchen or living room, they'd whisper and laugh. Finally, the girlfriend pulled me aside and told me what was happening. My boyfriend and his brother were placing bets on how long my labor would take and how many pushes it would take for me to shoot out our baby. I was disgusted and hurt by their immature behavior. His mom and the girlfriend were also appalled. I excused myself and left to go home. When my boyfriend got home later, I told him he wouldn't be allowed in the delivery room. I explained that his behavior really hurt my feelings, especially since labor and childbirth are such a scary and vulnerable experience for me. While we made up the next morning, I still don't want him in the delivery room. I told him that our relationship is still new, 6 months, and we're still figuring each other out. I also pointed out that we both need to grow up a lot to make our relationship work, co-parent effectively, and raise a child together. I want to build a future with him, but I had been on the fence about having him in the delivery room to begin with, and this incident tipped the scale. I ended the conversation by telling him he has a lot of maturing to do. He's really upset, and even his brother reached out to apologize. However, his brother also said I'm being rude and unfair by not letting my boyfriend witness the birth of his son, especially since he already apologized. I don't feel like an apology erases the hurt or makes what happened okay, but I still feel guilty about my decision. Additional context. This isn't the first time my boyfriend has been immature about the pregnancy. We've had multiple discussions about his behavior. He's teased me about my body, saying my private parts will be mangled after labor, and how gross it will be if I poop during delivery. He's also made fun of my inability to hold in gas now that I'm further along. I've told him multiple times that these comments hurt my feelings and make me uneasy, but the behavior continues. The bets weren't a harmless guessing game either. They were sneaky about it because they knew it would upset me. If they knew it would hurt me, why do it at all? I've tried to be clear with him about my feelings throughout the pregnancy, but nothing changes. I feel like I've been holding his hand through this process, and I'm worried I'll end up with 2 children to take care of instead of 1. Am I wrong for not wanting him in the delivery room, even if he apologized? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. Giving birth is not a spectator sport. This isn't the Kentucky Derby. He has no right to be in that room unless you want him there, and you don't. Maybe while he's in the waiting room, he can take bets on how long it will take him to grow up. What if he had kidney stones and you were betting on how many hours it would take him to squeeze the stone out of his pee hole? Would he find that amusing? Labor is hard. You need to feel 100% supported and loved. You cannot have someone mocking your process or making you feel self-conscious about your vagina, anus, or coping. Your vagina will not be mangled. This man is a horrible human being for degrading your body. You are creating life, bringing a human into the world. Your body is mind-blowingly incredible, and he's reduced you to a sexual object. Obviously, this relationship is fragile. He needs therapy. But you absolutely get to decide who supports you in labor, and if he can't, because he is more focused on keeping score and mocking your bowel movements, get him out. No one is entitled to be in that room. No one. He can't be a man, he can't be in the room. You're not in the wrong. And to all these boys saying men don't grow up, that's deeply misandrist and patriarchal. There are fantastic husbands out there who crush it in labor, who become fathers the second they try to conceive with their partners, who are empathic and knowledgeable and supportive and strong and loving and attentive. Stop pushing nonsense narrative that boys will be boys simply because it's easier to be a nonsense person. You make the decision every day whether or not to be a mature adult, and you take the easy way out because society believes this nonsense. Stop. It seems less about this particular incident, and more like, I'm having serious doubts about you as a parent to our child, and I don't want you there unless you get your nonsense together. This can play out one of two ways. You drift apart, and he doesn't become a part of your child's life, in which case you made the right call. Or he stays a part of the child's life, whether you stay together as a couple or not. In this case, he will always regret not being at the birth, and that's a heavy burden for him to bear. Obviously, he will need to prove his seriousness to you over the next few months. He shouldn't treat it as a given, and he's got some work to do. I really hope he gets it together, and/or you find a parenting outcome you're happy with. You're not in the wrong. Next up, years ago, I developed a passion for houseplants and began collecting them. At one point, I had about 70 plants, but eventually reduced my collection to around 35, keeping only the ones I truly love and cherish. My niece, Jenny, 14, has recently taken an interest in plants. She often visits, and we talk about them, propagate cuttings, and repot plants together. It's been a bonding activity that I've enjoyed. I had to leave town for 2 weeks for work, so I asked my sister-in-law, Jenny's mom, and Jenny if they could take care of my plants while I was away. I told Jenny I would pay her and give her a few cuttings as part of the deal. They agreed, and before I left, I gave them a detailed tour of my collection, explaining the care each plant needed. I even showed them some of my prized plants, which they admired. My seal asked about the cost of some plants, and while I didn't think much of it at the time, I shared how much a few of them were worth. When I returned, I was horrified. While they had watered the plants properly and provided the right amount of light, they had also decided to give several of my plants major haircuts. Many were utterly destroyed. My prized Cebu blue pothos mother plant was butchered, as was the climbing version. My Manjula pothos, golden pothos trained up my stairwell, and my string of pearls, hearts, and ruby necklace plants were all cut down. My silver-striped philodendron was ruined. Worst of all, my pink princess philodendron had been reduced to 2 leaves, and my albo monstera, a rare and expensive plant, was left with just 3 leaves. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was clear they had taken large cuttings, and I wasn't even sure they had taken nodes to propagate properly. These plants, which took years to grow and care for, were irreplaceable to me. When they came to return my keys, I completely lost it. I screamed at them, demanding to know why they had done this. Jenny started crying and said she thought it was okay because I mentioned I'd give her some cuttings. I yelled back, saying she knew I didn't mean she could destroy my plants. My SIL stepped in and said, "What's done is done." Jenny then admitted that her mom had already sold most of the cuttings on a marketplace. I was furious and screamed at both of them to leave my house and never come back. Later, I called my brother, Sile's husband, and told him what happened. He was shocked and said they had told him I had approved everything. To his credit, he brought back the unsold cuttings and apologized. But I told him I never wanted SIL or Jenny in my home, or even in the same room as me, ever again. He said I was taking things too far and reminded me that family means not holding grudges. I disagreed and told him to leave. I cried for the rest of the day, devastated by what they had done to my beloved plants. Am I overreacting by banning them from my home and refusing to be around them ever again? Or are my feelings justified? Am I in the wrong? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. The part about being sold already. This was planned. This was about money. A 14-year-old knows better than to steal someone's hard work and sell it. As a plant lover myself, I am so sorry this happened to you. It must have been devastating. Edit. OP has had further conversation in the comments. They clarify a couple of things. Niece lied to her father when asked about the cuttings in the first place. She told him that Auntie said it was okay. She lied because she knew they had both done something wrong. The niece has been in trouble for stealing before. This is super important to know. This girl was not influenced by her mother because she very clearly knew stealing is wrong. They both planned this together. She is not a clueless, completely impressionable girl. She is a 14-year-old who graduated to stealing small petty items from strangers, to grand larceny of a family member. Maybe the graduation is because people excused her behavior the first few times she stole? You're not in the wrong. Some of those plants can bring in several $100s. I have lots of plants as well. Most were under $30. If anyone cut them up, I would freak out. I have put so much care and time into them that it would feel disrespectful. It's a form of stealing. Also, I understand my plants and when they are ready to propagate, and how to do so without causing issues to them. I would kick anyone out who messed with my plants. I would never let them back in. For people saying she went too far, these thieves made thousands of dollars by stealing OP's plants. Do people know how expensive pink princess or albophilodendron is? If these people took multiple leaves, then sold them, they essentially made a lot of money by destroying her plants. Would people feel the same way if it was jewelry or a car?